after my husband perished in a fire on our wedding night. Everyone called me a harbinger of misfortune, only my mother-in-law stood by my side, insisting that since I had gone through the wedding ceremony, I was the rightful lady of the Marquis' household. Deeply moved, I served my mother-in-law with devotion, raised my adopted son, and even used all my dowry to support the Marquis' household. But once my adopted son had achieved fame and fortune, he poisoned me to death. Only as I lay dying did I learn that my husband had not perished in the flames, but had instead eloped with my beloved, taking my dowry with him. When I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn on my wedding night, watching my husband, who was already plotting to fake his own death to escape. I decided to give him a helping hand. Disfigurement, tongue-tying, severing the tendons in his hands. Do you want to die? I'll make sure he lives a long, miserable life. I will make him watch, bit by bit, as the Marquis' estate spirals toward ruin. Main text. I am the daughter of the wealthiest man in Jiangnan. After my parents tragically perished in a tsunami while trading by ship, I married Mu Zichen, the heir to the Marquis' estate, to whom I had been betrothed since childhood. Little did I expect that on our wedding night, Mu Zichen would perish in a fire while fetching a plate of pastries for me. Everyone said I was a harbinger of disaster, that I had brought misfortune upon my parents and now my husband, and that I should be buried alive. Only my mother-in-law did not blame me. Instead, she treated me like her own daughter. Filled with gratitude, I emptied my dowry without a single complaint to cover the Marquisate's immense financial hole and the endless demands of the household. When my mother-in-law brought a child to our door, insisting he be registered under Mu Zichen's name, I sought out the finest tutors for him and poured my heart and soul into paving his path in the bureaucracy. Yet after he rose to become a rising star in the imperial court, what awaited me was not a house filled with glory, but a cup of poisoned wine. If it weren't for you, you venomous woman, usurping my mother's place, I wouldn't have been separated from my father and mother, nor tormented by you for over 20 years. Mu Yinan smiled as he opened the door and respectfully addressed the man entering. Father, I heard the son I had raised for 20 years say coldly. Father, the venomous woman is dead. The three of us can finally live together. I forced my eyes wide open. The man before me, though nearing 40, was still strikingly handsome, no less so than on our wedding night 20 years ago. It was Mu Zichen. I opened my mouth to ask him why, but a mouthful of fresh blood gushed out, and I could not speak. In the end, I died in agony, looking at the sea of red and the fiercely burning red candles adorned with auspicious dragon and phoenix designs. I staggered, unable to believe that I had been reborn on the very day of my wedding to Mu Zichen. In my previous life, Mu Zichen had made an excuse to go to the kitchen to fetch some pastries for me, but he never returned. I waited and waited in the bridal chamber until my mother-in-law, accompanied by a throng of people wailing and screaming, burst through the door. My eldest sister-in-law immediately slapped me across the face, cursing me as a harbinger of doom who had brought about her brother's death. I stood frozen in place as the crowd shouted their accusations. I finally learned that Mu Zichen had gone to the kitchen to fetch pastries for me but had encountered a fire there, ultimately perishing in the flames. I was overcome with grief, but seeing my mother-in-law weeping to the point of fainting, my eldest sister-in-law screaming in helplessness, and my young, inexperienced younger sister-in-law, I steeled myself to see Mu Zichen through his funeral rites. Afterward, people outside accused me of being heartless and ungrateful that my newlywed husband had died for my sake. Yet I see Old remain composed and handle his funeral with such composure. What a cruel woman I must be. At that thought, I suddenly raised my hand and slapped him hard across both cheeks. Mu Zichen staggered back several steps, clutching his face in astonishment. I fought the urge to slap him again. I hurried forward to cup his face, my expression filled with self-reproach and concern. My lord. I thought an intruder had broken in. In my panic, I hurt you. Please do not blame me. Mu Zichen pressed his lips together, his downcast eyes dark as if he were suppressing his anger. I was too hasty. Are you hungry? My lady. I'll go to the kitchen and fetch you some pastries. In my previous life. His tender words had made me feel on cloud nine, only to lead them to label me a harbinger of misfortune who killed my husband. This time, no matter what he said, I shook my head. Instead, I boldly took his hand. My a mix of adoration and bashfulness, refusing to let him leave, and instructed the maid waiting outside to fetch some food from the kitchen. The flickering candlelight cast Mu Zichen's face in shifting shadows, and his expression grew increasingly flustered. I maintained a gentle smile the entire time, unless he gave me a satisfactory reason. He wasn't getting out of here. Finally, Mu Zichen stamped his foot lightly and said, Tea remembered me. Mother's tonic is still simmering on the stove in the kitchen. There's so much to do today. The maids might have forgotten about it. You need to fetch medicine for your mother-in-law. Then go quickly. My husband, hearing this, I finally released his sleeve with satisfaction, watching Mu Zichen's figure hurry away. I summoned Shang Yun, the maid from my dowry who had been waiting outside the entire time. Shang Yun, who had been beaming with joy, grew somber after hearing just a few words from me and turned to run out the door. Once the surroundings had fallen silent, I removed my heavy headpiece and waited quietly. The fire tonight was far more intense than in my previous life. Starting in the kitchen, several rooms in the rear courtyard were now ablaze. The flames blazed sky high, bursting into the pitch-black night sky like a crimson beast coiled in the rear courtyard of the Marquis' mansion. My mother-in-law, Lady Jiang, clutched her chest and stamped her feet in pain. I see. Ordering the servants to put out the fire immediately, all the while calling out Mu Zichen's name from time to time. It was hard to tell whether the house or her son was more important to her. After all, while Mu Zichen's death in the fire was a ruse, the flames were very real and were about to spread to the front courtyard. It took the crowd a long time to finally put out the fire. Husband. Just as Madame Jiang had begun to calm down, she saw me stumbling over, tears streaming down my face, and I brushed my eldest sister-in-law, Mu Yumian's hand ever so slightly. Mu Yumian, catching the hint just as she had in the previous life, was about to slap me. I dodged, causing her to lose her balance. She fell flat on her face in front of everyone, nearly knocking out her teeth. Madame Jiang, sobbing, stepped forward. Tanner, this isn't your fault. It's all because Chinner was so worried about you that he went to fetch you some pastries. And that's how this disaster happened. I stopped crying and looked at her in confusion. Mother, what are you saying? My husband clearly went to fetch the simmering medicine for you when this unfortunate incident happened. Why are you blaming me? Madame Jiang's expression suddenly darkened, and she blurted out, Don't talk nonsense. My son clearly went to fetch food for you. Just then, a lady pushed her way through the crowd. The Marquis is a dutiful son. He truly went to the kitchen to fetch medicine for the old lady. My maid and I both heard him say so with our own ears. Old lady, please do not grieve so deeply. This lady came from a distinguished family and spoke her mind without reservation. In my previous life, she had gotten lost in tea. he mansion and testified that Musician had died for me. But in this life, I had instructed my maid to follow closely behind Musician, allowing her to respond to the lady's words before he could. At these words, Madame Zhang's face turned as white as paper. She could never have imagined that Musician would use her as an excuse just to roam the world with his true love. In my previous life, Musician was praised as a deeply devoted husband, while I was branded a harbinger of misfortune. In this life, you will bear the blame for killing your own son. Tears welled in my eyes, and my voice choked with grievance, making me look pitifully vulnerable. Mother, I don't know which servant's idle gossip you've believed. My husband is dead, and now I'm faced with such slander. I might as well throw myself to my death right here in this courtyard. Slandering and driving her daughter-in-law to death on her wedding day. The gossip in the capital would surely crush Madame Zhang's spirit. I could hear the faint murmur of gossip drifting from all around. Madame Jiang quickly grabbed my hand and said through gritted teeth, "It's true, I lost my mind. I listened to the servants' nonsense and misunderstood my good daughter-in-law." I stopped crying and nodded obediently. The red silk was replaced by white banners. The wedding turned into a funeral. In the funeral hall, I wept until I was hoarse, my heart torn apart, clawing at the coffin in a desperate attempt to pry it open. My husband, how could you leave me like this? What am I to do? Left all alone. Let me follow you. Chang Yun pretended to pull me back, but in reality, she was helping me push the coffin lid. Just as a crack began to appear in the coffin lid, Madame Jiang, unable to spare a moment for her grief, urgently ordered someone to pull me away. If anyone discovered in public that this was an empty coffin, it would be the end of us. Amid the struggle, I lost my balance and collapsed limply onto Shang Yun. Chaos erupted in the memorial hall. Madame Jiang had no time to feign fainting and was forced to step forward to take charge. In this life, I shed only a few tears. Yet people praised me for loving Musician so deeply. How ridiculous. In my previous life, at Musician's memorial service, Madame Jiang wept until she fainted, while I, dressed in white mourning robes, was reviled by the crowd. When she awoke, she summoned me to her bedside and handed me the household ledgers. One by one, Madame Jiang said that since I had married into her family, she would treat me as her own daughter. She was advanced in years. Her eldest daughter had long since married out, and there was no one in the household she could rely on. So she entrusted the household management to me, asking me to oversee all its affairs. Big and small, I was deeply moved. But upon investigation, I discovered that this vast Marquise mansion was nothing but an empty shell. I took the ledgers and went to find her. She wept again. Her tears felt and sincere. The old Marquis passed away early, and Zichin had to shoulder the heavy responsibilities of the Marquisate at a young age. But no matter how capable he was, without connections in the court, he couldn't hold back the Marquisate's gradual decline. He had originally intended to call off the engagement with Yohe. Didn't want the Marquisate's ruin to hold you back. But the moment he saw you, he fell head over heels for you. He borrowed several hundred taels of silver on credit from the pawnshop, saying he wanted to bring you home in grand style. Who could have imagined Ned he would lose his life? She said that if Mu Zichin were here, he would surely have found a way. But now that he was gone, she, as a woman of the household, knew nothing of such matters. Looking at my ailing mother-in-law, my young niece, and my husband who died tragically because of his deep love for me, used my dowry to cover every expense. The marriage between Mu Zichin and me was originally arranged by the late Marquis and my grandfather. After the Marquis's death, The Mu family tried every trick in the book to break off the engagement. Yet strangely, after my parents passed away, they gave up on that and insist on honoring the betrothal. I suppose they realized that even if they annul the engagement, any noble lady they managed to coax into marrying into the family would surely not tolerate the loss upon seeing this hollow shell of a Marquisate and would make a spectacle of it for the whole capital to see. Only a woman like me orphaned, with no one to rely on, yet possessing a dowry as vast as mountains of gold and silver, could be deceived and manipulated by their sweet talk. Even if I knew the truth, there would be no one to turn to for help. After helping me to bed to rest, dismissing everyone, and closing the door, Xiang Yun finally reported to me with a grave expression. She had the young servant I'd brought from my parents' home block the back door of the kitchen. Mu Zichen's attempt to feign death had failed. Yet he wasn't truly dead either. When he finally fainted from the thick smoke, Xiang Yun opened the door, dragged him out, and arranged for a carriage to take him outside the city. After beating him, she severed the tendons in his hands. Then poured a basin of scorching hot charcoal onto his face and stuffed it into his mouth. Afterward, she gave him only a simple bandage to keep him alive and abandoned him at a temple outside the city. According to Xiang Yun, Mu Zichen writhed in agony on the ground, clinging to her legs and begging for mercy. If it weren't for the fact that I still had to put on a show in the mansion, I would have loved to personally cut this man into 1,000 pieces. After the memorial service, I fell ill. The next day, when I went to pay my respects, Madame Jiang, seeing how sickly I looked, didn't have tea. He had to dump the mansion's messy affairs on me. After I recovered, I used Mu Zichen's prayer for blessings as an excuse. Aside from paying my respects, I spent every day in my own courtyard, eating vegetarian meals and chanting sutras, turning a deaf ear to the world outside. The matron Fr. OM Madame Jiang's courtyard came by several times, but I turned her away each time. A month passed like this, and the outstanding debts could no longer be put off. I was lying in bed reading a storybook when Xiang Yun walked in, beaming with joy. Miss. There's been a lot of coming and going at Showan Courtyard today. TV moved quite a few things out. Madame Jiang had originally hoped that my dowry would help cover the household's deficits after I married into the family, so she had lavishly organized both weddings and funerals. Now, it meant she would have to shell out a hefty sum. The next day at breakfast, Madame Jiang brought up my younger sister-in-law, Mu Yuro, who was still unmarried. It's been quite some time since Yuro came of age, now that her brother is gone. As her elder sister-in-law, you must offer her sound advice. Take her to see Baozhai to select some fine jewelry. It mustn't be too shabby, lest it bring shame upon the Marquis' household and make us a laughingstock. Sabazai was the jewelry shop in the capital that noble women never failed to visit for banquets and celebrations. One couldn't walk out without spending at least 100 taels. She was asking me to take Mu Yuro to buy jewelry, yet she hadn't mentioned how much silver she was allocating to me. It seemed she intended for me to use my own dowry for Mu Yuro. Upon hearing this, Mu Yuro's delicate eyebrows knitted together. Mother, isn't this a bit too extravagant? Madame Jiang patted her hand. With your elder sister-in-law here now, you have nothing to worry about. I smiled and nodded at her. Mu Yuro finally seemed relieved, although Yuro feels that going to see Baozhai is too extravagant, since both mother and my elder sister-in-law have said so. Yuro, will do as you say. Seeing her like this, I sneered inwardly. Mu Yuro was different from Mu Yumian. She took after Madame Jiang. Sweet on the outside but bitter within. In my previous life, when I first entered the mansion, she would often come to me with a smile to chat and cheer me up. I treated her like a younger sister. seeing how she always carried herself with the calm grace of a chrysanthemum. No matter the situation, I took it upon myself to protect her, sending a share of everything good to her courtyard, when a maid in her quarters was embezzling funds and skimping on her food. I dismissed the maid that very night. However, she gave the maid silver, claiming that the maid's actions had been with her tacit approval, and now that I was in charge, she couldn't very well lose face by pleading on the maid's behalf. The maid was moved to tears and began spreading the story everywhere that I, a mere merchant's daughter, a wild hen turned into a phoenix, had become the mistress of a marquis' household and was now throwing my weight around, bullying the proper young ladies of the household. My reputation in the outside world grew particularly bad. As for the Four Treasures shop, no tea, only €. But even Madame Jiang had rarely shopped there. €, who had always claimed to be as serene as a chrysanthemum and disdained vulgar things like gold and silver, was now spoiled for choice. Finally, I asked her what she had chosen. Only then did €, withdraw her hand, shake her head, and resume her aloof demeanor, saying that I should make all the decisions. I pretended not to notice the jewel boxes she had deliberately placed within arm's reach inside. Even back at the manor, my younger sister said the jewelry at the Four Treasures shop was vulgar and overpriced. I suppose she doesn't care for the pieces here, though I find them all lovely. My sister-in-law isn't one to impose her will. Since that is the case, let us return to the manor. Hearing my words, the shopkeeper standing nearby immediately turned his gaze to €, and the noble women and daughters of officials around us all turned their eyes toward her as well. €, visibly panicked and tugged at my sleeve. Sister-in-law, are we really just going back like this? Didn't you say you'd buy me some jewelry? I smiled brightly. That's right. But you haven't found anything you like yet. Seeing that I was really about to leave, €, grabbed a silk-lined box nearby. Sister-in-law, I think this one will do. Let's buy this. It was a set of ruby and jade hair ornaments, quite valuable, as we were paying. Someone muttered. Humph. Pretending to be high and mighty, you've been eyeing everything. Yet you act like you can't find anything good. €'s face flushed. Afterward, I took her to Kilyuoj to have new clothes custom made. As soon as we stepped into the estate, the matron waitin' at the gate escorted us to Madame Jiang's courtyard. Madame Jiang ran her fingers over the exquisite, luxurious headpiece. Unable to put it down, she nodded in satisfaction, yet still put on an air of concern and asked me, "Isn't this headpiece a bit too expensive? Isn't it too extravagant?" I shook my head. All of this was arranged by Mother. Euro is the young lady of the Marquis' mansion, with marriage talks underway. Naturally, everything must be of the finest quality. Having easily parted me with a large sum of silver, Madame Jiang naturally couldn't contain her excitement. Sure enough, a few days later, she sent a matron specifically to invite me over for lunch. She truly wanted to make me feel indebted that one who eats another's food speaks with a soft tongue, and one who takes another's hand becomes pliable. No sooner had I stepped into the courtyard than I heard faint sobs coming from within. Mu Yumian was crouched at Madame Jiang's feet, weeping as if her tears were falling like rain on pear blossoms. "Mother, it's only been a year. Yet my mother-in-law makes me stand in the proper posture every day. My knees are nearly ruined." Xiaxing spends his days carousing outside, never opening a book, with no silver left in the household. How am I supposed to get by in the future? But you know the situation here. Your brother has just passed away, and without the imperial stipend, we've taken in a new daughter-in-law. Our fields and shops barely cover our household expenses. We simply cannot spare any extra money for you. My child. Your life is so bitter. Why did you leave us so soon? Zichin. Now your sister is being bullied to death by her in-laws. Mother. When they saw me enter, they embraced each other and wept even louder, looking at me with eyes full of hope as they cried. Seeing them cry, I wiped away my own tears and wept even louder than they did. My husband. Why did you leave so suddenly? How am I supposed to manage on my own? After we had finished crying, I took Jiangshi and Mu Yumian's hands in mine. I never imagined, Auntie, that you were living such a hard life. No matter how tight things are in the household, how could you possibly use a daughter-in-law's dowry? Thankfully, I've met an open-minded and kind mother-in-law like you, who wouldn't let your daughter-in-law spend a single coin even when times are tough. As I spoke, tears of emotion welled up in my eyes. She couldn't afford to fall out with me just yet. Madame Jiang gritted her teeth and forced a smile, pretending not to notice no matter how Mu Yumian tugged at her sleeve or gave her meaningful glances. In my previous life, seeing how hard Mu Yumian's life was, I'd intended to mend our relationship and had offered to give her a portion of my dowry. She'd immediately beamed, saying she'd misunderstood me all along and would treat me like a real younger sister from then on. She claimed to treat me like a sister, but in reality, she treated me like a piggy bank. At first, she would come up with some excuse, but later she became increasingly brazen in demanding money from me. If I so much as frowned, Madame Jiang would rush over to me, wiping away tears, and sob that she had failed to raise her daughter properly, but that Mu Yumian's life was truly miserable and that if I had any anger, I should direct it at her instead, with filial piety as her guiding principle. And aft, a barrage of tears. I had no choice but to nod in agreement. Unable to get any money, Mu Yumian left without even having lunch, fearing Madame Jiang would drag me along. I went out to see her off. She looked at me with disdain, but I paid no mind, chatting with her warmly about everyday matters. Auntie, you're the eldest daughter of the Marquis's household. After all, no matter what, you should have married into a family where the husband is a fifth-rank official and become his primary wife. How could mother, such a kind-hearted woman, let you marry into a family like that? She must have been deceived by someone with ill intentions. It's truly despicable. A few days ago, Mother said it was time to find a good match for Euro. She specifically had me take Mu Ro to the Four Treasures shop to pick out some headdresses and jewelry, saying she absolutely had to find her a kind-hearted husband among the court officials, so she'd never want for food or clothing for the rest of her life. What business is that of yours? Having just married into the family. Mu Yumian cut me off. The old Marquis passed away early, although Mu Zichin inherited the title. His official rank was low and he lacked the emperor's favor. Mu Yumian's marriage prospects were stuck in limbo, too high for some, too low for others, and she was forced to remain an old maid. Mad. Aim Jiang simply decided to select a man from a humble background with a promising future, someone who could support the Mu family later on. After much consideration, she set her sights on Xiaxing, who had passed the Shoukai examination years ago. Though Mu Yumian was reluctant, she ultimately compromised for the sake of her family. Yet despite passing the Shoukai examination at a young age, Xiaxing was a man who shunned hard work and was addicted to gambling. His greatest ambition was to climb the social ladder by marrying into a noble family and live a life of ease. On their wedding day, Lady Jiang, eager to flaunt her wealth, had Mu Yumian's dowry delivered in a procession of 64 palanquins, a spectacle that left many in the capital green with envy. But that very night, Xia and his mother opened Mu Yumian's dowry chests one by one, only to discover that dozens of them were empty. The man who had been so tender and affectionate toward her just moments before now slapped her across the face. Even a starving camel is bigger than a oar. Xiaxing used Mu Yumian's dowry to gamble and quickly gambled away all the money. But since Mu Yuro hadn't yet married and there were still unmarried daughters in the Mu clan, Mu Yumian couldn't get a divorce. She had no choice but to return to the Marquis' mansion to weep bitterly. In the allowance Lady Jiang gave her home to avoid being beaten by Xiaxing. I only learned of these events after I married into the Marquis' household in my previous life. At this point, I made an excuse to leave. And as I turned to go, Mu Yumian stood behind me with her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes burning with intense jealousy. Though I refused to give Mu Yumian any money, Lady Jiang secretly sent a matron to deliver funds to her. However, after that day, Lady Jiang, though she said nothing, suddenly fell ill. She could not sleep at night nor take her medicine. The court physician examined her several times but merely diagnosed her with excessive worry weighing heavily on her heart, requiring rest and recuperation. The physician explained that Madame Jiang had long managed the Marquis' estate, leaving her body depleted, compounded by the loss of her son in middle age. She had suffered a sudden fit of grief that left her bedridden. Her son had been dead for several months and only now was she falling ill from grief. I looked at the prescription list: 1000-year-old ginseng, Tian Shan's snow lotus, and blood reishi, and found myself laughing in exasperation. But upon second thought, since it wasn't my money being spent, I agreed readily. Madame Jiang naturally handed over the household management to me, adding she would only regain some spirits if I personally brewed the medicine and tended to her at her bedside. I did exactly as she asked. In my previous life, Madame Jiang had spent more than half the year feigning illness, so these tasks came quite naturally to me. However, after just a few days, she waved me away, telling me I didn't need to come anymore. I wasn't going to tend to her for nothing. I had a play written. A mother-in-law jealous of her daughter-in-law, who on the wedding night deliberately had her son taken away, leading to his death, and after his death, found every excuse to torment her daughter-in-law. For a time, the common folk who heard the play all cursed the mother-in-law. At this point, I spread the word that Madame Jiang, unable to sleep due to Mu Zichen's passing, had fallen ill, and I tended to her at her bedside day after day. People quickly began associating Madame Jiang with the image of the wicked mother-in-law, praising me for my filial piety and condemning Madame Jiang as malicious. The rumors grew more and more intense. Madame Jiang was so distressed that several large blisters formed at the corners of her mouth. While I was so delighted, I ate several large bowls of rice. I comforted her. Mother, the innocent will be proven innocent. Why should you bother with these BAS? Alas, rumors. They lower your dignity and make the Marquis' household a laughingstock. A few days later, the estate steward came to me looking gloomy, clutching the ledger. Madam, the funds in this ledger are nearly depleted. I took the ledger and flipped through it casually, tooting to myself. This MO's expenses were nearly equal to the Marquis' household spending over the past 6 months. I recalled that the Marquis' household owned a shop and said offhandedly, "Sell the shop in the east part of the city." Madame Jiang was not skilled in business management, and most of the Marquis' shops yielded only meager profits. It would be better to sell them. The steward fell silent, standing there at a loss. Shouldn't we discuss selling the shop with the old lady first? Steward, the Marquis is dead, and my mother-in-law is gravely ill. Don't bother her with such trivial matters. The household is struggling. But you've been here for years, since I became steward. You've helped me a great deal. I'll make the decision. Starting this month. Your monthly allowance will double. Paid from my private funds. A look of joy spread across the steward's face. Thank you, madam. I was thoughtless. I'll see to it immediately and will not disappoint you. Over the years, Madame Jiang had skimmed off a considerable amount of silver from the servants, both openly and covertly. To maintain the Marquis' household's appearance of wealth and prestige, grievances had long been simmering within the household. By the end of the month, after paying the monthly wages to the maids and servants, the remaining funds were barely enough to provide thin porridge and pickles for the household's daily meals. Madame Jiang pointed at the watery porridge on the table and summoned me to scold me loudly. Madame Qin, I entrusted you with the household finances because I trusted you. I'm still ill. And yet you've been pulling the wool over my eyes with this. I flung my handkerchief aside and wiped away my tears. Mother, you know full well how much money the household has. I've spent everything exactly as you instructed. This month, I gave my cousin 100 taels. Purchasing jewelry and having new clothes made for Euro costs several hundred taels. And your medicine has cost several hundred taels as well. By the end of the month, there are only a few taels of silver left. There's simply no money in the accounts. And I'm incompetent. We've even had to sell a shop just to cover the Marquis' household expenses. If she wants to live in luxury, she'll just have to be penniless by the end of the month. There's no way I'm dipping into my dowry money. Madame Jiang's face flushed crimson. Her lips trembled, and she couldn't utter a word. Nearly fainting on the spot. Mother, even if the accounts are empty, you mustn't let anything happen to you. I made up an excuse to escape back to my own courtyard. Who would want to tend to her there? Once back in my courtyard and the door shut, I quickly called for Shang Yun to bring the dishes prepared in the small kitchen to the table. This year's newly harvested pre-rain Longjing tea. Buddha jumps over the wall. And braised shark's fin, the aroma. Oh, the aroma. Since I'd taken over as steward, Mu Euro had been dropping by every now and then to drink tea and chat with me, occasionally revealing her somewhat worn dresses and dull jewelry. I pretended not to notice, since she couldn't say it outright. She gave up after visiting a few times. Today, as I was reviewing the ledgers, she came over, acting coy, to ask if the crown princess planned to host a spring banquet. She wanted to hire a teacher to learn the zither. Something similar happened in my past life. Mu Euro had come to me, shy and timid, asking if the crown princess would be hosting a banquet to select a consort for the third prince. I asked her if she had feelings for the third prince. She quickly denied it, saying she only wished to find a devoted partner and live as an ordinary married couple. I breathed a sigh of relief. As far as I knew, the third prince was no good man, since she said she wanted to learn the zither. I searched the capital far and wide for a renowned teacher for her. Little did I expect that at the crown princess's spring banquet, her performance would astonish everyone, and she would be chosen by the third prince to be his principal consort. Fearing it was my fault, I prepared a lavish dowry for her, but behind my back, she claimed I had forced her to learn the zither to curry favor with the third prince, and that she was fortunate to have found mutual affection with him. Otherwise, she would have rather died than marry him. She did not know that the third prince had actually set his sights on the vast wealth in my hands, and that it was only because the emperor suspected the prince of colluding with court officials that she was able to seize the opportunity to become his consort. Only after she was successfully married to the third prince as his consort did she discover that there were hundreds of beauties in the inner quarters of his mansion. The third prince was fickle, favoring her for a few days before quickly becoming infatuated with a new beauty. Mu Euro read and clung to him, and the third prince blurted out, "Your hands are hideous and repulsive. Just looking at them disgusts me. They're nothing like Qing Qing's hands." which are as smooth as white jade. Muyuro didn't hate the philandering third prince. Instead, she turned her hatred toward me, the one who had sought out a master teacher for her, when I was chained in the ancestral hall with my tendons severed. She poured a basin of hot oil over me. If you hadn't forced me to practice the zither for your own selfish desires. The third prince, and I would have been the envy of everyone. Why would he have come to despise me? You even forced my brother to fake his death and flee. You simply can't bear to see me happy. Why should I bother with such an ungrateful wretch? You're about to meet potential suitors and will be married before long. What matters most now is embroidery and needlework, learning how to manage the household. Music, chess, calligraphy, and painting are merely pastimes to pass the time. I thought you understood this. How could you be so oblivious to what truly matters? I wasn't paying for it. And Muyuro hadn't managed to get any silver from the Jiang family either. Yet she actually used the silver she'd saved over the years to hire a qin player to perform for her. Looking at the invitation sent from the Grand Princess's mansion, the corners of my lips curl. Ed slightly. How could I possibly grant her wish? As the spring banquet drew near, Muyuro still hadn't received an invitation. Unable to maintain her composure any longer, she came to find me. I took a leisurely sip of tea and sighed. The invitation from the Grand Princess's residence arrived a month ago. Muyuro's eyes lit up. But my next words doused her hopes with a bucket of cold water. However, I went to the Grand Princess's residence and declined. She slammed her hand down on the table. Then, realizing her lack of decorum, suppressed her anger and demanded an explanation. Why? Sister-in-law, do you know how much effort I've put into the spring banquet? I've practiced the zither from dawn till dusk every day. My hands used to be as soft and white as jade, but now they're covered in scars. I can't even hold chopsticks steady. I glanced at her, feeling torn. It can't be helped. Mother is ill, and I'm still in mourning for Zichin. Before I finish, Muyuro grabbed her handkerchief and left, her eyes brimming with resentment. Shortly after, a matron from Lady Jiang's entourage came to summon me to show in courtyard. Lady Jiang sat in the seat of honor, her expression grim. Upon seeing me, Muyuro began to sob. I pretended not to notice and put on a look of delight. Mother, you couldn't even get out of bed this morning. Yet here you are sitting up this afternoon. Truly, it is a blessing from heaven and my husband's protection. A fleeting look of awkwardness crossed Madame Zhang's face, but she quickly composed herself and said sternly, I heard from Yuro that you privately declined the spring banquet at the Crown Princess's residence. How could you act so recklessly without informing me? Do you even respect me as your mother-in-law? I leaned gently against the chair, my delicate eyebrows furrowing in a look of grievance. Mother, you're misunderstanding your daughter-in-law. I regard you as my own mother. You've been ill for months, and I've been so worried and restless that I couldn't possibly have the heart to attend a banquet. Not only is an invitation from the Crown Princess's residence insignificant, but even a palace banquet pales in comparison to your well-being. Furthermore, Yuro has already told me she has no feelings for the third prince. With you ill and me observing mourning, if she were to go out dressed up, people would surely find fault with her and leave a bad impression on the noble ladies. Mother, you need not worry that the Crown Princess will hold it against us. She is kind and considerate of you. She has specifically instructed the ladies of all the noble houses not to send invitations to the Marquis's residence for the upcoming months. Please rest and recover here at home. I will handle all the affairs of the household. Upon hearing this, Madame Zhang's mouth fell open. Her fingers trembled as she pointed at me. Unable to utter a single word, Muyuro fainted on the spot. The spring flower viewing and outings did not separate men and women into separate seatin arrangements. They were important venues for the noble young men and ladies of the capital to socialize and observe one another. The matriarchs of prominent families would also be present to scout for suitable daughters-in-law. With the crown princess's decree, Madame Jiang would be forced to take ill even if she were healthy, and the women of the household could not attend the banquets. It would be difficult for Mu Yuro to find a husband to her liking. In this life, Mu Yuro was unable to attend the spring banquet. The third prince chose the daughter of a low-ranking officiala girl with whom she did not get along at the banquet. Mu Yuro was so furious she could have ground her teeth to dust. She threw a tantrum in the mansion, crying and screaming without regard for her dignity. I listened to it day after day and found it quite delightful. Another month passed, and two people who had been waiting for a long time came calling. Mu Zichen's beloved, Zhou Ying'er, had traveled all the way from Baisher County with their son, Mu Yunin. Unlike in the previous life, when Madame Jiang had brought them to the capital in a 4-horse carriage, well-fed and well-dressed, this time the two of them were covered in mud, looking haggard and weary, like beggars by the roadside. Madame Jiang was so startled when she saw them that she dropped her teacup, shattering it. Only after Zhou Ying'er introduced herself as her distant niece did she finally let out a sigh of relief. Zhou Ying'er gently nudged Zhou Yunin's back, urging him to go and greet Madame Jiang, his biological grandmother. Yunin, go and pay your respects to the old lady. Madame Jiang, mindful that I was still standing nearby and repulsed by Zhou Yunin's filthy stench, covered her nose in disgust and quickly ordered a servant to stop him. Enough. No need for such formalities. Just settle in now that you're here. Zhou Ying'er glanced at Madame Jiang several times, as if she wanted to say something but held back. Madame Jiang could tell she had something to say, but I just sat there, refusing to budge. It wasn't until the sun had set and I'd had supper at Madame Jiang's place that I reluctantly left. That night, the servants at Shoan Courtyard came and went several times. A little later, my informant stationed at Shoan Courtyard reported that after I left, Zhou Ying'er wept uncontrollably. After sobbing out a few words, Madame Jiang fainted in terror. When she came to, she flew into a terrible rage and smashed several vases. The old lady first said she was going to report it to the authorities, but after taking a couple of steps, she said she wouldn't go. Then she told everyone in the courtyard to go out and look for someone. But when asked who, she wouldn't say. She just kept crying. That cousin Zhou has such an air of superiority. After the old lady fainted, she ordered the servants around just as if she were the mistress of the Marquis's mansion. Of course she was arrogant. With Mu Zichen's fate unknown, her son was effectively the future master of the Marquis's estate. The next day, when I went to pay my respects, Madame Jiang was clutching her forehead, her eyes bloodshot and dark circles under them. She clearly hadn't slept a wink all night. After exchanging barely a few words, she waved me away. With her own son missing, Madame Jiang sighed constantly all day long, looking a decade older from worry. Perhaps realizing that Zhou Yunin might be the only bloodline Mu Zichen left behind, she began to treat Zhou Ying'er with greater warmth. Madame Jiang sat in the seat of honor, holding the hand of Zhou Yunin, who was dressed in brocade. Her once well-maintained hair was now streaked with white strands, and though her figure looked weary, her spirits were considerably better than before. Zhou Ying'er sat below, and upon catching sight of me entering, she flashed a smug smile. Mother, I bowed slightly in greeting to Madame Jiang. We're all family here. There's no need for formalities. Please sit down. Madame Jiang smiled. She pushed Zhou Yunin toward me. Tanner, since Zichen is dead, the title of the Marquis's estate cannot remain uninherited, though Yunin is merely a distant relative from my maternal family. Spending these past few YS with him has shown me he is a bright, diligent, and studious child. Why not adopt him into your household so he may honor and care for you in the future? According to the laws of this dynasty, if a woman's husband dies and she has no children, she may remarry after 3 years of mourning. However, if she has a child of her own, she may still remarry, but she will inevitably face public censure. In my previous life, Madame Jiang used this very excuse to make me raise Mu Zichen's illegitimate son, preventing me from remarrying and gradually siphoning off my dowry. Furthermore, bright and diligent. It's laughable. What on earth do those words have to do with Zhou Yunan? Zhou Ying'er is solely focused on how to win Mu Zichen's favor, while Mu Zichen thinks only of how to share tender moments with Zhou Ying'er. In my previous life, Zhou Yunan didn't begin his education until he was sent to the Marquisate mansion at the age of 10. Now, at only 7, he doesn't even know a single character. I feigned reluctance. Well, Cousin Zhou is Yunan's biological mother. How could I possibly take her child and make him my own son? Besides, Cousin Zhou is still alive. If Yunan were to inherit the Marquis' estate in the future, the question of whether I or Cousin Zhou is his mother would surely become a laughingstock to outsiders. If I were to formally adopt Yunan, it would be a great injustice to Cousin Zhou. NWH. And if Cousin Zhou's in-laws were to come looking for Yunan in the future, how would we handle that? Upon hearing this, Zhou Ying'er fell to her knees with a thud, weeping bitterly. Madam, the Marquis' household has already shown USA widow and her orphan child great kindness and mercy. For him to become your son is a blessing he earned in a past life. After my husband's death, his family drove me and Yunan out. They will certainly not come to take the child back. Madame Jiang furrowed her brows and slammed her hand on the table. Enough. Since Yunyang has agreed, Tanner, you must not refuse. Since my mother-in-law had spoken, as a dutiful daughter-in-law, I naturally had to agree. I smiled. Then, let us first adopt Yunan as an adopted son and invite a tutor to the mansion to instruct him. If he studies well and earns the tutor's praise, we can then formally adopt him under my name. That way, people in the capital will know the Marquis' mansion didn't just pick up any child off the street. E.T. What do you think? Mother. Seeing that I had softened my stance, Madame Jiang found it difficult to argue further. After all, whether he was adopted sooner or later, as long as she was there, Zhou Yunan would remain the Marquis' sole legitimate son, under the watchful eyes of everyone present. Zhou Yunan obediently led out to me. Mother. I stepped forward, took Zhou Yunan's hand, and replied with a smile. Mother is right here. Then I pulled him over to Zhou Ying'er, smiling gently. Although Yunan hasn't been formally adopted into my household yet, it's only a matter of time. From now on, he'll be raised under my care, and I'll treat him as my own son. Starting today, he'll call his cousin Zhou Aunt Zhou. Cousin Zhou, please don't come to see Yunan anymore, lest he constantly think of his biological mother and grow distant from me. Come here, Yunan. Call her Aunt Zhou. Zhou Ying'er was dumbfounded. She had thought that by having Zhou Yunan adopted into my family, she was simply using me as a fool to foot the bill and work tirelessly to secure his future, while behind closed doors, she would remain his mother. Zhou Yunan is still very young. When I told him to call his mother Aunt Zhou, he immediately shook off my hand and shouted, She's not Aunt Zhou, my real mother. You're a bad person. I don't want you. I looked at Madame Jiang with a helpless expression. Mother. Yunan and my cousin share a deep mother-son bond. It seems he still doesn't want to be my son. I'd rather not tear them apart. Lest I end up looking like the villain. Madame Zhang's face flushed alternately red and pale as she glared at Zhou Ying'er with disgust. Zhou Ying'er, catching sight of Madame Zhang's expression, looked heartbroken as she coaxed Zhou Yunin. Yunin, listen to your mother. From now on, the Marquis's wife is your mother. And you must call me Aunt Zhou. She ground her teeth as she uttered the words lady of the Marquis's house. I took Zhou Yunin back to my courtyard, had a room prepared for him, and invited a renowned tutor from the capital to begin his education. Providing him with the finest brushes, ink paper, and inkstones from my dowry. At first, Madame Jiang still summoned Zhou Yunin to her courtyard every day, fearing I might mistreat her own flesh and blood grandson. But when she saw that I truly treated Zhou Yunin as my own son, willing to part with my dowry for his use and devoting myself entirely to him, she finally put her mind at ease. Zhou Ying'er, however, was not so at ease. In my previous life, I had noticed that Zhou Yunin had a mischievous and restless nature. So I set up a small table beside him to sit with him while the teacher read. And after class, I would make him sit at the desk to read and practice calligraphy with me. In this life, though I've hired a renowned tutor for him, I pay not the slightest attention to how he behaves in class. He draws turtles and fights crickets during lessons, infuriating the teacher so much that his beard bristles as he comes to complain to me. I ordered someone to take the ruler and strike Zhou Yunin's palm with it. Blow by blow, the ruler was 2 fingers wide. And hearing the sound from outside the courtyard wall, Zhou Ying'er's heart trembled with pain. Zhou Yunin was still very young. After just a few strokes, he threw himself on the ground, screaming and thrashing about. I ordered a servant to hold him down while the beating continued. That very night, Zhou Ying'er dragged Zhou Yunin along to complain to Madame Jiang. Madame Jiang doted on her grandson. She mocked me, eyeing I wasn't from a scholarly family and didn't know how to raise children. She also claimed the tutor I'd hired was too strict and unsuitable for a child's early education, insisting I replace him, with Madame Jiang backing him. Zhou Yunin grew even more unrestrained, and I naturally let him have his way. In just 1 month, we'd gone through several tutors. However, Zhou Yunin grew increasingly dependent on me. As the saying goes, where there's milk, there's a mother, especially a mother like me, who was wealthy and willing to spoil him with food and clothing. The tutor's teach-in quarters were close to my courtyard, and since I had a small kitchen here where I cooked a wide variety of dishes, he had never eaten so well in his life. Even when Madame Jiang called him to Shouan courtyard for a meal, he would rush there and rush back, devouring everything in sight whenever he returned from school. In my previous life, I strictly controlled his diet. But in this one, I've let him do as he pleases, and he's turned into a chubby little ball. Zhou Ying'er couldn't stand seeing Zhou Yunin so close to me. She ran off to Lady Jiang to gossip. I see that the young masters of the capital's prominent families all go to that imperial academy to study. Yet you, madam, keep having tutors come to the house to teach him. No matter how good the tutors you hire are, they can't compare to the teachers at the Imperial Academy. Yunin is Qinlong's only child. He is destined to inherit the title. It would be to his advantage to befriend the young masters of the prominent families as early as possible. Since he isn't your biological son, you simply don't care for Iner. You can't keep having Madame raise Iner forever. Madame comes from a merchant family. What does she know about raising children? Don't let him end up not learning his lessons properly and instead picking up the habit of calculating with Madame. Though Madame Jiang didn't understand these matters, she felt Zhou Ying'er had a point. She summoned me and proposed sending Zhou Yunin to the Imperial Academy to study. Oh mentioned how hard I worked managing the household affairs and took Yunin back under her care. I was only too happy to oblige and agreed immediately. Yunin's academic foundation was weak at first, which is why I kept him here and hired a tutor. Now that he's been studying for some time, Deason's mother-in-law has spoken so favorably, we should send him off. Zhou Ying'er was delighted to hear this, and Madame Jiang smiled with satisfaction. After all, Zhou Yunin's reputation for mischief had long since spread throughout the capital. It's good that he's gone, only then can he cause even greater trouble. To put it nicely, the Mu family is a noble household. To put it bluntly, they're a fallen family. They have no influence in the court and aren't even on par with a lowly fifth-rank official, let alone attending the Imperial Academy where princes and dukes study. Sure enough, Zhou Yunin caused trouble within just a few days of arriving at the Imperial Academy. The young nobles at the Imperial Academy, seeing his greasy, pig-like appearance, kept their distance. Ever since arriving at the Marquis's mansion, Zhou Yunin had been pampered by the servants day in and day out. Under Zhou Ying'er's constant nagging, he'd convinced himself that the Marquis's title was his for the taking. He even brazenly declared that he'd soon be the heir apparent, and one day the Marquis himself, and that everyone present would have to bow to him in the future. Everyone laughed at Hema, mere Zhou clan member dreaming of becoming the Mu family's heir apparent. They called it a pipe dream, saying that only when the Marquisate's wife adopted a son from the clan would he be the true heir. Zhou Yunin flew into a rage and charged at the boy who had laughed the loudest. Though his martial arts were poor, he was stocky and sturdy, and he sent the boy flying with a single shove. The boy was the grandson of the current general of the state, a man whose entire family had a history of loyalty and valor. He was the sole heir of that branch and was cherished dearly. His servant rushed back to the general's mansion to summon reinforcements. By the time the general's men arrived, Zhou Yunin was still perched on the boy's back. The general's men flew into a rage, immediately surrounding Zhou Yunin and beating him mercilessly. They reported the incident to the authorate, IES, and demanded he be thrown into prison. When Madame Jiang heard the news, her legs trembled so violently she could barely stand. Fortunately, the young man had suffered only superficial injuries, and the general's household chose not to pursue the matter further. To demonstrate respect for old general fighting on the frontier, Zhou Yunin was held in prison for nearly half a month before being released. His legs had been broken by the general's men on the spot, and he had not received timely medical treatment after being imprisoned. When Madame Jiang and Zhou Ying'er waited outside for his release, they discovered he had become lame, with his body crippled and his health ruined. Zhou Yunin's career was over before it had even begun. The three of them clung to one another, weeping their hearts out. Back at the mansion, once the door was shut, Madame Jiang saw me stand ing nearby and launched into a tirade. Chen, I thought you were a kind-hearted woman, so I entrusted Yunin to your care. I never imagined you would teach my once obedient inner to resort to violence, ruining his future. Mother, you've misunderstood your daughter-in-law. Back then, when I wanted to discipline Yunin strictly, both you and cousin Zhou defended him, saying I was heartless. Why are you blaming me now? Besides, I've heard that Yunin declared at the Imperial Academy that he intends to inherit the title. Mother, I haven't even agreed to this yet, and he's already acting as if he's the future Marquis. If I truly agree to have Zhou Yunin adopted into my household, and he eventually inherits the title, where will I have a place to stay? Madame Jiang's expression darkened instantly. She wiped her face with a handkerchief before explaining. Why should an adult take a child's idle talk so seriously? Besides, we were planning to adopt an heir under your name anyway. It's only a matter of time before he inherits the title. Mother, Let's just forget about adopting the child. My tone was firm, without waiting for them to say another word. I turned and walked away, mad with anger. Lady Jiang spun around and slapped Zhou Ying'er across the face. Despite what had happened, Lady Jiang did not press the matter with me. She simply said that since I was unwilling, the adoption would be called off. And with that light remark, the matter was dropped. However, they did not give up on Zhou Yunan. They posted notices all over the capital seeking renown. Ned physicians, but wave after wave of people came, only to shake their heads and leave. Whenever I had a moment to spare, I would go to Huiming Temple to pray for the repose of my late parents. I noticed a section guarded by soldiers and asked a novice monk there. I learned that the third prince was observing a period of fasting and prayer for his late mother. On the way back to the mansion, I lifted the curtain of my palanquin and saw a crowd of over 1,000 people outside the city walls, their clothes in tatters. Their eyes filled with despair. Xiang Yun, noticing my transfixed gaze, explained, "These are refugees fleeing the floods in the south who have lost their homes and are heading north. The garrison troops won't let them into the city. They only distribute porridge outside the walls each day." The next day, I set up a porridge stall outside the city to distribute food myself, and gave each person a small portion of dry rations. The people swarmed forward to receive the plain porridge, bowing to me in gratitude. Glancing arrow. UND. I spotted a familiar face. I never expected Mu Zichen to still be alive. Truly, a scourge endures for 1,000 years. I told Shang Yun to give him a bowl of porridge. Mu Zichen downed it in one gulp, looked up and saw me, a fleeting spark of light flashing in his eyes. He tossed the bowl aside and began wailing, lunging toward me to grab at my clothes. Shang Yun kicked him right in the gut. "How dare you? My mistress was kind enough to give you porridge, yet you dare to grab her clothes in public and frighten her." Mu Zichen fell flat on the ground, clutching his chest and groaning in pain. "Enough, enough. I know this man. He's a pitiful soul. We're short on a laborer at the manor, take him back with us." I glanced at Shang Yun, and she immediately understood. She shouted, "My lady is showing you mercy and letting you work at the estate. Why aren't you thanking her?" Under everyone's gaze, Mu Zichen, his eyes filled with humiliation and anger, crawled on the ground and kowtowed to me 3 times. After returning to the mansion, I handed Mu Zichen over to the steward. "From now on, this man shall be called Goer. Assign him to a remote area, keep him away from the ladies of the household. Make sure he works hard." The steward understood and kicked Mu Zichen. "Get moving." It wasn't long before I saw Mu Zichen sweeping the courtyard of my quarters. Shang Yun told me that Lady Jiang had sent him here, saying that since I had brought him back, who'd be in my courtyard. Lady Jiang, using the excuse that the mansion was too quiet, invited the wives and daughters of prominent families in the capital to come to the mansion to watch a theatrical troupe perform. She also ordered Mu Zichen to attend to them from the sidelines. The noblewomen and were all startled when they saw Mu Zichen's terrifying face. Madame Jiang explained, "Tanner brought this man back. With so many refugees in the capital these days, why did she single him out? I suppose she must have known him before and couldn't bear to see him suffer." As she spoke, she looked troubled, as if she wanted to say more but held back. The noblewomen cast mocking glances back and forth between Mu Zichen and me. Just as the performance reached its climax, a servant announced that the crown princess had arrived. Madame Jiang, recalling how her earlier feigned illness had displeased the crown princess, intended to go before her to save face, but the matron behind the crown princess stopped her. The crown princess walked straight up to me and unfurled the imperial edict in her hand. Everyone present looked puzzled and knelt in unison. because I had donated half of my family's fortune to alleviate the flood disaster in the south. His Majesty had issued an edict commending my loyalty, righteousness, and benevolence, declaring me a model for all households, and specially conferring upon me the title of first-rank lady of the imperial court, the matron, following the crown princess's instructions, helped me to my feet. Congratulations, lady, you have shown great virtue. Hearing the matron by the crown princess's side speak thus, the guests at the banquet also began to praise my benevolent and righteous act. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jiangshi slowly rise, leaning on the table, her face deathly pale, and her body trembling as if about to collapse. The fortune she had coveted and schemed for so many days had been easily donated away by more than half of it, and she had lost her own son and grandson in the process. Realizing that I had never spent a single coin on them since my marriage, they could no longer fail to see that I had done this on purpose. She exchanged a glance with Zhou Ying'er, and both their eyes were filled with resolute malice. After reading the imperial edict, the Grand Princess took my hand and said gratefully, "Thanks to you, the floods in the south have been resolved so quickly, and the people outside the city are being escorted back to their hometowns by the troops." The melting snow at the beginning of the year, combined with months of heavy rain, had caused severe flooding in the south. The court had allocated disaster relief funds months ago. Yet the number of refugees fleeing the floods continued to grow. The emperor ordered the crown princess's husband, the prince consort, to travel south to oversee the relief efforts. There, he discovered that the relief funds had been embezzled by officials at every level. Less than 100 taels had actually reached the people. The prince consort acted decisively, executing the corrupt officials. Yet the silver had long since been squandered on the officials' lavish robes, harems of beautiful concubines, nightly revelry, and endless feasts. The northern barbarians seized the opportunity to launch a massive invasion of the borderlands, exhausting the people and depleting the treasury. Court officials began to cry poverty one after another. When I went to see the Grand Princess that day, aside from returning the invitation, my primary purpose was to offer the Qin family's southern granaries and tens of thousands of taels of silver in exchange for her protection. In my previous life, I feared public opinion and devoted myself solely to managing the household affairs, keeping my distance from worldly matters. While Mu Yumian attended the crown princess's spring banquet under the pretext of representing the Marquisate estate, when the crown princess proposed raising donations for the flood victims in the south during the banquet, the room fell silent. It was only when the crown princess promised a generous reward that Mu Yumian stepped forward and offered 10,000 taels of silver, with her leading the way. The other noblewomen followed suit and made their donations. But Mu Yumian didn't have that kind of money. As soon as she returned the Marquis' residence, she told me how pitiful it was that countless people in the south were suffering from the floods, and that she wanted to donate silver and grain. I thought this was a good deed, so I had a maid take her to the treasury to collect the funds. Mu Yumian donated 10,000 taels in one go, alleviating the urgent crisis caused by the southern floods. She received the emperor's commendation, secured a prestigious official post for her husband, and their marital bond grew ever stronger. After the Grand Princess had departed, the other ladies gathered around me, adding and laughing. A clumsy maidservant spilled a bowl of tea onto my skirt. I rose and curtsied to the ladies and noble young women present before taking my leave. When the opera performance ended, Madame Jiang remarked that the peonies in the manor were in full, vibrant bloom, and led a row up of ladies and young misses to view them. Amidst the flower-filled grove, two naked figures lay entwined, their bodies intertwined in a passionate embrace. occasionally emitting sounds that stirred the imagination. A smirk curled at the corner of Madame Zhang's lips. But before her scolding word could escape her mouth, she heard my puzzled voice. "Mother, what is happening?" Madame Zhang's legs went weak. She clung to the matron's hand just to steady herself. "I am here. Who are those people inside?" If they were servants, she could blame lax household discipline. But if a noble lady were caught in a secret tryst with her lover, the Marquis's mansion would become a laughingstock in the capital. And no noble lady would ever dare attend a banquet here again. She tried to cover it up, but I beat her to it. With a look of outrage, I stepped forward and pulled back the cloth draped over the two figures. "How dare you? Who are you to commit such lewd acts in broad daylight within the mansion?" "Ah, cousin." As I pulled back their garments, Zhou Yinger's flushed face was revealed to everyone. Madame Jiang collapsed to the ground, screaming, "Someone drag this adulterous pair out and beat them to death. Beat them to death." I stopped the servants who were rushing forward and ordered a bucket of water to be poured over the two of them, in an attempt to ruin my reputation. The Jiang family had purchased an extremely potent aphrodisiac. It took several buckets of water to splash over her before Zhou Yinger finally came to, screaming as she frantically tugged at her clothes to cover her naked body. I looked utterly exasperated. "Cousin, I know you've been lonely since your husband's death, but you can't just have an affair without a matchmaker. If you want to marry the young servant in the mansion, just say so outright. Surely mother wouldn't refuse you." Mu Zichen, who had awakened, had already been restrained by my men. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he were about to devour me. However, Cousin Zhou's husband has long since passed away. All these years, she has struggled to raise Yunan on her own. Now that things have turned out this way, with you and the young man sharing mutual affection, it is not less than a perfect match. Mother, you should be happy about this. Zhou Yinger, heedless of everything else, shook her head frantically, threw herself to the ground, and began bleeding profusely. "I won't marry him. I've been framed. Old lady, save me. Save me." I grabbed Zhou Yunan's arm without a second thought. "Come here, Yunan. Your mother has found you a father. Go call him father right now." Zhou Yunan shook off my hand, shoved Mu Zichen aside, let out a loud wail, and plopped down on the ground, kicking his legs wildly as he rolled about. "I want to be the crown prince. To hold high office I refuse to be the son of a lowly man." Watching her own grandson about to become someone else's son, Madame Jiang felt dizzy, spat blood. Her eyes rolled back, and she fainted. The ladies of the inner quarters, who had seen every kind of sordid secret, just smiled and comforted me. But in the blink of an eye, news spread throughout the capital that the distant niece of the Marquisate's matriarch and a servant of the Marquisate's household had been caught rolling around together in front of everyone. As the banquet dispersed, Zhou Yinger, holding Zhou Yunan's hand, was shouting and screaming outside my courtyard. "Qin Tanner, you cannot marry me off to a lowly servant. Yunan is Qinlong's son, and I am the future Marquis's own mother." Cheng Yun threw a basin of cold water at her, then summoned the household staff to drive the two of them out of the estate. "You shameless harlot, fornicating in public. Do not slander the Marquis's reputation. The Marquis and my young mistress have been married less than a year. Didn't you see how old your son is?" Passers-by joined in the mockery. Everyone in the capital knows the Marquis adores the Marquise. Who do you think you are? Some unknown young woman, to dare slander the Marquis? Remember how the Marquis knelt and bowed 3 times with every step, praying for the repose of the Marquise's late parents. It truly moved everyone in the capital. It's all because Mu Zichen went to such lengths to pretend he loved me back then. Just to lure me into the Marquis's mansion. Unable to bear the crowd's ridicule and scorn, and with her patron in the mansion now fallen Zhouyinger. Fearing I might truly RRY her off to Mu Zichen. Fled in disgrace with Zhou Yunan. Madame Jiang lay on the bed. Her eyes wide and fixed on a single point. Not blinking once. She looked like a walking corpse. When she saw me enter, her eyes darted toward me. She stopped pretending. Her gaze piercing like a knife as she demanded in an icy tone. "What are you doing here?" I walked over and sat down at the bedside. "Mother. Isn't this ridiculous?" Cousin Zhouyinger actually claimed that Zhou Yunan is her and her husband's son. That's nothing but a lie. I had her thrown out immediately. Madame Jiang gritted her teeth. "You venomous woman. What sin has our Mu family committed to bring you, a woman with such a cruel heart, into our home? You've thrown our household into chaos and killed my son." I took Madame Jiang's hand and smiled. "Mother. I have good news. Zichen is alive. My husband is alive." Madame Jiang stared blankly for a moment. Then seemed to come back to life. She gripped my hand excitedly and struggled to sit up. "Where is my son? Zikini Zichen. I had Mu Zichen, whose legs had been broken, dragged in. Guess what? Zicheni's actually right here in the mansion." Mu Zichen heard the voices and lifted his head. Beneath his disheveled hair, his eyes met Madame Jiang's. His face twisted into a hideous grimace. As soon as Madame Jiang regained her senses, she ordered Mu Zichen to be dragged out, pinned to a bench, and mercilessly flogged 50 times. Every stroke drew blood, leaving his lower body a bloody, mangled mess. Madame Jiang could not believe this was the same handsome, extraordinary son she once knew. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to get out of bed, her hands trembling. He brushed aside Mu Zichen's disheveled hair. At the slightest touch, the scabs on his face began to fall away, revealing raw, crimson flesh. She saw his mouth gaping open, its interior a pitch-black void. Mrs. Jiang let out a scream, spat a mouthful of blood, staggered, and collapsed straight onto the floor. I covered my face with my hands and let out a mournful wail. "My husband, mother." But as I wept, my sobs turned into laughter, growing louder and more unhinged. Finally, it was almost over. Mu Zichen lay sprawled on the ground, his eyes bulging with fury, uttering muffled growls. His expression clearly revealed his desire to flay my skin, devour my flesh, and drink my blood. But now, he was the fish on the chopping block. I rose to my feet and called out toward the door. "Shang Yun, the old lady has fainted from anger. Hurry and fetch a doctor." My exquisitely embroidered silk shoes crushed Mu Zichen's fingers with a heavy thud. The pain made him try to sit up, but my next step landed squarely on his spine. I thought I heard a crack, and he was slammed back down onto the floor. Only when the maids and servants outside entered did I withdraw my foot, feigning fear as I cried out, "Quick! Doggie's gone mad. Grab him and drag him out." Madame Jiang had suffered a stroke. She lay in bed, her face twisted and unrecognizable, unable to care for herself. Mu Yumian, who hadn't even bothered to visit when Madame Jiang was feigning illness, now came by frequently. Her cheeks were red and swollen, and she used strands of hair to hide the bruises at the corners of her eyes. Yes, yet the moment she entered, she was utterly arrogant, immediately launching into a tirade of criticism against me. When she realized no one was paying her any mind, she gave a cold snort and turned to head for Showan Courtyard. Every time she came, she would order all the servants attend ing to the courtyard and the rooms within to leave. A few days later, a servant reported that half the jewelry in Madame Zhang's room was missing. I had Xiang Yun give her some money as a reward and told her not to make a fuss, while also having the staff in Madame Zhang's courtyard reassigned to their duties. I also summoned the steward and told him there was a jade ruby in the mansion, which I had placed under Madame Zhang's pillow in the hope that she would recover soon. Within a few days, officials arrived at the door, and Mu Yumian and her husband were arrested and thrown into prison for stealing and smuggling imperial gifts. As for Mu Yuro, she didn't fare much better. I deliberately had a maid tell her about the third prince's affair at the temple. Being infatuated with him, she began visiting the temple every few days under the pretext of praying for Madame Zhang's well-being. I heard that pilgrims caught her and the third prince in a compromising position right there on the spot. When the emperor learned of this, he flew into a rage, berating him for committing such an indecent act in the sacred sanctuary of a Buddhist temple. He stripped him of his court duties and confined him to his residence to reflect on his misdeeds. Mu Yuro returned to the mansion. Trembling, I ordered her to kneel in the ancestral hall, awaiting the third prince's household to come and take her as their bride. That night, Xiang Yun and I brought the wedding gown to the ancestral hall. Mu Yuro merely glanced at it, her head held high, a sneer on her face. Sister-in-law, I am now to Ma RRY the third prince. How could this wedding gown and headpiece possibly match my current status? I am to be married tomorrow. I advise you to go to the Kilyuoj Pavilion at Sibaozhai at once to have a new set prepared for me. Otherwise, if the third prince holds you accountable, you will not be able to bear the blame. As for the dowry, I think the shops you own in the east and west of He City are quite suitable. You wouldn't begrudge parting with them for my wedding, would you? If I marry well, it will bring honor to you as well. Those shops she mentioned are the most profitable ones in my dowry. How naive of her to think that. Sister, the third prince holds you in such high regard. He certainly won't care about your dowry. Don't let others think he's marrying you for your dowry. It would tarnish the bond between you two. I smiled faintly and raised my hand to slap her. Besides, the third prince's mansion sent word today that a small palanquin will be waiting at the side gate of the Marquis's residence at midnight. Just step inside, and by tomorrow you'll have your wish. You'll be a concubine in the third prince's household. Upon hearing this, Mu Yuro's face turned ashen. She scrambled to her feet, her features contorted in fury, looking as though she had lost her mind. Impossible. The third prince said he would marry me as a secondary consort and bring me into the mansion openly and honorably. You're lying, Chin Tanner. You're lying. How could a man's words be taken at face value? The third prince was a womanizer with a harem of beautiful concubines. In the serene sanctuary of a Buddhist monastery, Mu Yuro had offered herself to him. He didn't mind sweet-talking her a little, but once the matter reached the emperor's ears, it was a different story. At midnight, the red wedding palanquin waited at the side gate, but Mu Yuro refused to put on her wedding gown. The matron sent to fetch her ordered the servants to tie her up tight like a dumpling and toss her into the palanquin. She spat. You shameless creature. Seducing His Highness, you should be grateful I'm even letting you in, considering how much the Jiang family had doted on her son in both her past and present lives. I used the excuse that she needed quiet to recuperate and had her moved to the most secluded part of the mansion to be with her son. Since I took charge and doubled the monthly allowance for the household servants, they naturally obeyed my every command, hearing only what EY were supposed to hear and seeing only what they were supposed to see. The two lay on separate beds, facing each other, one with a twisted face and drooling mouth, the other a cripple, his body covered in festering sores. Not a single patch of healthy skin left. They were kept alive each day on nothing but broth and medicinal concoctions. If they refused to drink, servants would force-feed them. If they tried to kill themselves, rags were stuffed into their mouths, and their hands and feet were bound to the bed. When I'm bored, I go in for a short visit and tell them about the recent gossip from the capital. For instance, Zhou Ying'er took Zhou Yunan as the mistress of some minor off. Ishil, the official's vicious wife, had her beaten nearly to death. Mu Yumian and her husband were soon to be exiled to Lingnan for theft. And Mu Yuro, having married the third prince as a concubine, was quickly cast aside by him, out of jealousy toward a pregnant secondary consort. She brazenly sent the secondary consort an abortion potion under the pretext that the principal consort had not yet conceived, only to be stripped naked and thrown into the street by the principal and secondary consorts acting in concert. Alas, Mu Zichen lived only half a year longer, and Madame Jiang passed away 2 months after his death. Madame Jiang's funeral was held with great pomp. I fainted several times while supporting the coffin. Indeed, the entire capital praised me as the most dutiful wife, urging their own daughters-in-law to take me as a model. When night fell, I ordered her body to be thrown into the common grave to be reunited with her son. Now, in this vast marquise mansion, I am all that remains, with a fortune of N,000 taels and the title of a noblewoman bestowed upon me. No one in the capital dares to cross my it. I am so lonely. The story ends here. Thank you all for your companionship. See you in the next installment.